I'm Tom Lux, and with Dave Swan, we're from Machinist District 751 Labor History Committee. Today we're going to talk with Ron McGaha, a longtime activist and leader within the District 751. Today's date is April 23rd, 2010. Welcome, Ron. Now, you grew up in Wenatchee. Tell us a little bit about growing up there and your family and how things were.
Well, I was born there in 1943 on the old bridge that's still there, right in the middle of that bridge where I was born. So that's my claim to fame in Wenatchee. Growing up in Wenatchee was typical of a small, farming community. We had, basically haves and have-nots, and we were somewhere on the upper end of the have-nots. And my dad worked in irrigation there, and finally, just before he retired, he worked for the water district there. And that and brief stints of the railroad were both union jobs. Other than that, pretty much non-union in that town at that time.
So your dad did have a couple union jobs with the railroad?
He had one with the railroad, one with the water district.
Yeah. The rest of your family, were they union or?
No.
Not over there. Now, did you have any brothers or sisters?
I had 3 sisters.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, what brought you over here to Boeing, and what shop did you get hired in on?
Well, when I left Wenatchee, I went in the Navy, and in the Navy, I was rated as a pattern maker, which is a tooling type job. And when I got out of the Navy, Boeing was recruiting. As it turns out, they were recruiting in the 1965 strike, unbeknownst to us over there. And they hired us on the spot for tooling, or hired me on the spot for tooling. And I had 2 weeks to report to work, so I did what any red-blooded Wenatchee boy would do. I went hunting for 2 weeks, getting ready to go to work at Boeing. And I came back and the strike was over. The 1965 strike was a relatively short strike. It was over by the time we came to work. So I came to work on November 6th, I believe, 1965. And I was hired in as a pattern maker, and my 4 years at Boeing, I never was in the pattern shop other than to campaign. I was never ever in the pattern shop. I spent most of my working life in the shop as a template maker, and when the template maker rate was finally disbanded, I was the last one on the seniority roster, so I was the last template maker, if you will.
So they don't have that job anymore?
No, it's been combined with a tooling job.
So was that shop in Renton?
I worked in actually all the plants, but mostly at Renton. I worked in the 475 building in Renton. We used to do all the master control gauges for all the airplanes, and all the new airplanes came off of what was then called the master control gauge table, MCG table we called it. And after numerical control came in, there was no reason to do all that lofting and so on. It was all done numerically.
So what can you tell us about Boeing back in 65? What was it like, as compared to what we've seen change?
Well, Boeing was a lot more crowded than it is now. There was just a lot more people to do the job because there was more work in-house. And we did everything from fabricate the parts to assemble the sub-assemblies to the final assembly and so on. And not nearly as much of it was subcontracted to other suppliers.
What do you remember about the guys you hired in with? Any ones stick out, or any stories?
No, not really. In those days, there were so many people coming and going. There were people being hired in one side of the shop and laid off on the other side of the shop. It was quite chaotic in those days, and so I do have some early friendships there, but I can't really recall of any unique characters at this time.
Were there any women in the shop?
Very, very few. Most of the women that were there were clerks, and most of the clerks were a good share of them anyway, were left over from World War II. And they were hiring into the clerks and tool rooms and so on. They were hiring new people, but there were a lot of the World War II types still left over in the clerical jobs.
Hey Ron, I was going to ask you about what first got you involved in the union itself.
Well, I think like most young folks around, I got somebody recommended I volunteer to help on an election committee. And we've helped, we worked election committees, counting votes and manning the polls and that sort of thing. And that's really how I kind of got started.
Can you recall some of the people that influenced you to get involved in the union?
Paul Kenny was the president, or was actually running for president of Local C at the time, and I helped him with his campaign. And then as we worked, like I said, on the election committees, just sort of gravitated to it from that point, because you see how the system was working, and you saw the shortcomings of the system, and corrected them.
All right. Can you talk to us about a little bit of your brief stay in management? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was about 1978 or 79. I went into management for the tooling program for the 757-767 program. And at the time, I was on the district council and was recording secretary of Local C, so I had to give up a little bit to get in there. And initially, it was a very rewarding job, because I was able to, help people, mentor people, and that sort of thing. And ultimately, I got fired from management. I actually got fired from the company. We had in 1977, when we were on strike, we had a United Way problem. United Way refused to help any of our members on strike or fund any of the agencies that did help our membership. And so after the 77 strike, people were basically boycotting what was called BEGNEF at that time, Boeing Employees Good Neighbor Fund. And so I'd gone into management in 77, and I still felt strongly about that. And they mandated that everybody in management would have to join BEGNEF. And I said, well, I for one am not going to. I'm not going to be mandated to do anything like that. And my crew, there are people out there that felt the same way, because they'd gone through a bitter strike there, and they didn't want to join either. So ultimately, what happened is that we had management got together and said, if he won't, I was the only supervisor in tooling that was not a member, and so they basically fired me. And the crew, in protest, the crew went out and solicited people withdrawal cards. And they had a big stack of withdrawal cards. And they said, here, we want to do this. I said, well, I'm going to hang on to these, because I want to get them in trouble, So essentially, I got fired for standing up for the crew, which you're not really supposed to do, I guess, as a manager.